Week 7 of college football did not disappoint. We're going to take a look at the top games and talk about what happened in what was a very exciting weekend. We'll start with a couple Thursday and Friday night games. We start with a Tulane beating ECU 26-19. The Green Wave found a way to win. It was not pretty, but they found a way to hang on in the end. USF put on an absolute show. It was fun to see a sold out crowd at North Texas, but USF comes away with a 63-36 win. A little bit sloppy once again. Turnovers were definitely a problem for USF, but they do find a way to come out with the win to push them to 5-1. Other Friday night games were Rutgers and Washington. That was a closely contested game early on until Damon Williams decided that he was going to be the star of the show. 538 total yards and 4 touchdowns. The Huskies win 38-19 to go to 5-1. Fresno State at Colorado State. Colorado State had Fresno State really just miserable the entire game. And while EJ Warner did throw for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, Colorado State took care of business 49-21. Then we get into the morning slate on Saturday. We start with Ohio State at Illinois, and there were some questions about, can Illinois actually hang in this game? Are they going to give Ohio State a little bit of trouble? And early on, it did not look like that. You had Ohio State jumping out to an early lead, and it looked like this was going to be a game that Ohio State just kind of ran away with. And in a way, they kind of did. You start out with a field goal to get them up 3-0. The Ohio State trio of wide receivers and Bo Jackson on the ground moved the ball relatively easily. They just couldn't finish. And then later in the quarter, you get a CJ Donaldson run to put them up 10-0. They also forced Luke Altmaier's first interception of the season, so you felt like everything was going their way. In the second quarter, they get another field goal and then a touchdown, and again, it was just turnovers, whether it's turnover on downs, a fumble recovery. Ohio State was just taking it to this Illinois offense. Illinois did get on the board, though, late in the first half. They get a field goal to get 3 points on the board, and the drive that they had stalled. They had an opportunity to potentially score a touchdown, but it was ruled incomplete as the receiver did not get his foot in bounds, and Alano is going to kick that field goal for 24 yards. Ohio State just continues to be an absolute menace when it comes to scoring when inside the 5. Teams are struggling mightily to get the ball in the end zone, even if they are close. And that is something that Ohio State's really going to hang their hat on. You saw it with Jim Knowles last year. You're seeing it with Matt Patricia. And Illinois struggled to move the ball against Ohio State, and then when they got close, it got even more difficult. Now, Illinois does get things off to a good start in the second half. Lafferty scores that 1-yard touchdown. Altmaier completed a couple of big passes to get them down the field. And then they get that touchdown again to get them to double digits. But Ohio State later in the quarter does respond with a touchdown of their own. CJ Donaldson gets in the end zone once again. And it was a fumble recovery that aided that drive. Again, turnovers were a problem for Illinois. And it was just a good performance by this Ohio State defense. Ohio State deserves a lot of credit for what they did, and it was really fun to watch. Even though this score doesn't look like it was anything drastic, it felt like Ohio State was pretty much in control the entire time. Illinois does add a later touchdown to make it 34-16, but again, this was a game that Ohio State took care of business, and it wasn't the prettiest win, but it was still a win that you need to give them credit for and need to give some recognition. Now, I don't know what this Ohio State team is going to do when they face a tougher team than Illinois, but I do know that they are playing with a ton of confidence, and they don't really feel that anybody is going to be a big-time challenge quite yet. The defense is playing incredibly. The turnovers were a massive problem for the teams that they faced, and Illinois had 3 of them in this game that ultimately led to points for Ohio State. So clearly they're doing something right. And if you're Ohio State, you just keep handling business. I'd like to see them open up the offense a little bit more. I feel like this offense hasn't been as explosive as it can be consistently. We've seen it at times, but I would like to see Julian Sain get a little bit more involved in the passing attack. I'd like to see them, I should say, the downfield passing attack, the deep balls, maybe let him just unleash some things a little bit more. I don't know. The offense is just maybe just keeping things concealed until they have to really put it to use. But we'll see. Again, 272 yards is not going to be anything crazy, but if you only need 272 yards to put up 34 points, I think that Ohio State's going to feel very comfortable about that. I think there's just more things that it just nitpicking, if you will, and not really anything that's alarming by any means, but I'd like to see Ohio State kind of open things up a little bit more and truly flex their muscles and show their dominance. Another game that was closer and gave Alabama a little bit of a scare is going to Missouri to face a Tigers team playing with a lot of confidence, a lot of excitement in this game. And Missouri kind of gets things off to a good start, and they get Alabama on their heels a little bit. Brett Norfleet catches a 26-yard pass from Bo Perbula. It was a really nice pass over the top. Just a great start for Missouri to get up in that game. You start out with a 7-0 lead, and from there, your defense looks like it's playing with a lot of confidence, a lot of energy. Now, there were some penalties early on that definitely hurt them, but this was a defense that came ready to play. And Alabama struggled with it, I think, for quite a bit of time in this game, throughout the entire game. That is something that Missouri has been really confident about, is that their defensive line specifically plays with a lot of energy and gets to the quarterback. And early on, it looked like they were doing the exact same thing. Now, one thing that has been a nice development for Alabama is Ty Simpson over the last few weeks. Ty Simpson's playing about as well as anybody in the country, and it's a big reason why Alabama's had so much success throughout the last few weeks. Again, this is why they're having big wins. And it wasn't the prettiest win for Alabama. It was not their best win, but it is a win against a good football team that you have to feel good about. And Ty Simpson delivered when they needed him to deliver once again. 23 of 31 for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. This was an offense that just needed to, or took care of business when it needed to drive down the field. And in the first quarter, you found that it was tied, and it was a good start for both teams. And it came down to which one was going to blink first. And that team was Missouri in that second quarter. Alabama scores 2 times in that second quarter to give them a lead. And it was once again the balance of this offense, and ultimately an Isaiah Horton touchdown from Ty Simpson that puts them ahead to start the second quarter. And they had a field goal about midway through the second quarter. And this is where we talk about the offense and what it needs to do, but Alabama's defense is going to get more love as we talk about this more and more. They were stifling Missouri. Missouri couldn't really move the football at all in that second quarter. They were struggling to sustain drives, and Alabama took advantage. And you knew this was going to be a tough game when you head into halftime up 17-7. You knew that was going to be a potential challenge, 17-10. And you knew that this was going to be a potential challenge for this team. You knew this was going to be a game in which you had to limit your mistakes and just grind out a victory. And when you go into the second half, you knew that this was going to be a time for you to dig deep and find a way to take advantage of this game. Now, they did not do that right away, because Missouri recovers a fumble in the first play of the second half and turns that into a touchdown. Bo Perbula with a 5-yard touchdown run. Now, it was not his best game. Perbula went 16 of 28 for 167 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He also ran 11 times for 61 yards and 1 touchdown. So not his best game, but you're also going against Alabama. So that's something to keep in mind. That is something to remember when you're going up against a team like this. And Missouri has taken great strides. So if anything, you should feel confident about what you were able to do in this game and feel good about the result, even though it didn't go your way. There is clearly growth in this program. There's clearly steps that are being taken, and college football appears to be as open as it's ever been. So there is something to be said about that. You're going to have tough games. You're going to have games in which you struggle. And this was unfortunately one of them, but they still found ways to take advantage of that. So they go in and they make this a tie ball game. And you're right in it. You're in the second half with Alabama, and I think you're feeling pretty good about where you're at. Even when Alabama adds that field goal with 9 seconds left in the third quarter to go up 3, you're still feeling pretty good. Now, it was back and forth. Nobody was really scoring, and Alabama does what it does best. And Ty Simpson, the throw that he made to Lotzer Brooks on 4th and 8 was absolutely nasty. Just an incredible pass by Ty Simpson. And this is what we're talking about. He is playing with so much confidence. He trusts his arm. He knows exactly where he wants to put the football, and he is making some incredibly accurate throws that are huge and in clutch moments. The throw on 4th and 8, like I said, was an incredible display of passing, and you just something that maybe you didn't anticipate seeing from him, and in a clutch moment, that's exactly what you needed from him. Now, Missouri does score to make this game 27-24 with 1:40 left. Ultimately, don't get the ball into the end zone again, or don't get a chance to tie it up, and Alabama comes away with the win. So this again, Alabama, a grinded out victory, not anything that was overly impressive, but still a game in which you found a way to win. You found a way to get the job done. And for that reason, you should still feel pretty good about this 27-24 win over a really good Missouri Tigers team. Now, in one of the uglier games of the day, you had Cincinnati beating UCF 20-11. This was a game that I thought could be potentially a little bit higher scoring, but there are a few things that did not happen and a few things that just we'll just dive into it. So it wasn't a lack of offense. I mean, this was UCF had 413 yards of total offense. Cincinnati had 306. So it was not their best performance, but it wasn't like they didn't have anything at all. They were able to move the ball a little bit, but again, just the points weren't following. So we start things off with Cincinnati is kind of getting off to a good start, and it feels like they're just going to run away with this one. Jeff Caldwell has been a really good addition for this offense, and Brendan Sorsby clearly values what he brings to the table, and it gets things started with a 40-yard touchdown pass with 8:23 left in the first quarter. The defense forced a turnover on downs, and this defense was very good early. They also forced a fumble on that next drive. Didn't do anything with it, but Cincinnati gets that early lead. Head to the second quarter, and Caldwell strikes again. 9-yard touchdown pass from Brendan Sorsby, and the roller coaster drive essentially was really interesting to watch. And this is where maybe you got some of that foresight of this was going to be a rocky game. You had some explosive plays on this drive, but you also had penalties that limited the success. Ultimately, they do get a touchdown and jump out to a 14-0 lead. And then Brendan Sorsby leads them on another drive with 4:13 left in the second quarter. They get another field goal to go up 17-0. So this is a game where you feel like, okay, Cincinnati's just taking care of business. UCF can't really do much. And it's just going to be a game in which they just find a way to hang on and just pull away late and not really let UCF stay in this game. Now, UCF does get a field goal late in the first half with 24 seconds left. They kick a 45-yarder. They had multiple Cincinnati penalties that definitely helped to get that down the field, but they were able to make it a 17-3 ball game. Now, no points were scored in the third quarter, and this was one of the weirdest things. UCF had a drive in the third quarter that was 9 minutes and 2 seconds, and it ended in a punt. We talk about the service academies and how we want to see those 9 and 10-minute drives because we just know that they're being efficient. UCF had that drive that was 9 minutes, and they punted. It'd be one thing if they missed a field goal. It'd be one thing if they turned it over, but they ended in a punt. And when I looked at that, I was like, how did that even happen? How did it even get to a point where you're punting? So we're going to go through the plays here that led to that. You start off with a 2-yard gain by Miles Montgomery. And then you have a pass for 7 yards, another rush for 2 yards. Then you have a penalty that loses you 10 yards. You have a 17-yard pass, a 4-yard rush, a 12-yard rush, 3-yard rush, 5-yard pass, 3-yard rush, 5-yard pass. I'm already feeling like they should be close to the end zone at this point. 3-yard run, 4-yard pass, 3-yard run, and then a 15-yard penalty, an incomplete pass, a 5-yard penalty, an incomplete pass, and then a punt. How on earth did that end up in a punt? They got all the way down to Cincinnati's 26-yard line. They lose 20 yards, and they punt from the plus 46. That's probably why UCF didn't deserve to win this game. That is just crazy. But no points in that third quarter, and from there, it was just a Cincinnati team kind of hanging on. They kick a field goal to go up 20-3. Joe Royer had a nice 67-yard catch to set that up. Don't finish with the touchdown, but they do get the job done there. And then UCF adds a later touchdown and converts on the 2-point conversion to make this a 20-11 ball game. So if you're Cincinnati, I think that this was an ugly win. Sometimes you're going to win ugly. It's not your best win, but you're used to winning ugly or playing those ugly games. So you've already had a couple of those. You probably feel okay with that, but not your best win. If you're UCF, I don't know. It looked like Taven Jackson was warming up, but didn't play. I don't know really any update on that, but I'm curious to see if he will play going forward, because honestly, Cam Fancher's fine right now, but he is not the solution to the problems. He is not the best option, in my opinion, of what UCF has. So you're looking at a team that is full of questions right now, and Cincinnati is playing with a ton of confidence. They're 5-1, but that was not their best performance by any means, and they do get a win out of this, but they need to figure some things out as well. Other games in the morning slot, we had the Pitt Panthers pull off an upset over Florida State 34-31. It pushes Florida State to 3-3. That's their third consecutive loss. Mason Heinschel is great once again, his second week in a row as Pitt's quarterback. 21-29 for 321 yards and 2 touchdowns. We talked about UCF and Cincinnati. The 20-11 win for the Bearcats pushes them to 5-1. UCF falls to 3-3. UCLA at Michigan State. UCLA had that big win over Penn State last week, and they're looking to build on that momentum, and they do. A 38-13 win over Michigan State puts them to 2-4. Michigan State falls to 3-3. Nico Iamaleava, 16-24 for 180 yards and 3 touchdowns. SMU gets the job done against Stanford. 34-10 pushes them to 4-2. Stanford falls to 2-4. Kevin Jennings, 22 of 30 for 247 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then a couple of group of 5 games here. Louisiana went to James Madison and hung tight with the Dukes. 24-14 for James Madison. Alonzo Barnett, 26 of 40 for 290 yards and 3 touchdowns. Toledo gets upset by Bowling Green. Both teams are now 3-3. Chip Trayanum did what he could, 27 carries for 125 yards and 1 touchdown. There's a lot of things going on with Toledo right now, and they're not good. Eddie George having a good year in his first season with Bowling Green. Houston goes into Oklahoma State and wins 39-17 over the Cowboys. Connor Wegman, 21 of 30 for 306 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ole Miss struggles mightily with Washington State. They do find a way to win. The number 4 team goes to 6-0, a 24-21 win. Kewan Lacey, 24 carries for 142 yards, but this was an ugly win for a team that should have won by a lot more. Then we jump into the afternoon slate, and it was an incredible afternoon slate. Indiana finding a way to win 30-20 on the road against the Oregon Ducks. And that was such a fun game to watch. It was a defensive battle for quite a while, and it was just exactly what you wanted, I think, in a good college football game. I liked the uniform matchup. I liked Oregon's uniforms with the black and the green helmets and the green pants. I thought that popped really well. Indiana's clean look with the white on white with the maroonish helmets. Again, I think that that's just a good look, and that's something that I just really like in college football is the uniforms, and this was a good uniform matchup. Indiana gets things started with a field goal, get a good stop on the first Oregon drive, and they turned that into 3 points. Oregon's defense was getting away with some of that shifting that we've talked about coming into the year and that should have been called. Now, honestly, Oregon got away with multiple calls early in the game, and Indiana was obviously trying to point that out. Curt Cignetti was livid that Oregon was getting away with it because it wasn't just a natural shift. It was Amari Washington and Bear Alexander moving really quickly into a different gap, and Indiana got called for false starts when it should have been a delayed game by Oregon. Ultimately, it doesn't matter in the end, but that was one thing that was very interesting. That's been a point of emphasis so far this year, and that did not get called at key moments. Oregon gets on the board and takes the lead with a nice 44-yard touchdown pass from Dante Moore to Malik Benson. The tempo that they ran caught Indiana sleeping, and it was a nice little, I don't know if it was speed option, but they had a little throwback to Benson, who was wide open, and it gets them up. But then Indiana goes right back at it, and this is one thing with Indiana. I talked about this actually before against Illinois. The one thing they do is that they don't get caught up in the moment. They are very good at making sure that they get their best playmakers the ball. And a lot of times that seems very obvious, but Indiana is very intentional about how they get themselves back in a game and how they reshift their focus. And they did that. They got Omar Cooper the ball. They got Elijah Surratt, Roman Hemby, and they were able to go back up in this game because they just recalibrated their focus to, hey, what do we do best? What are the things that we do? They kept things simple. They got the ball to their playmakers, and they took the lead. Heading into the second quarter, Oregon ties things up. And again, we knew this was going to be a back and forth game for a little while. We just didn't know what the second half was going to provide. They had missed chances from Dante Moore, and Indiana was providing a ton of pressure on Dante Moore. And I think that was one thing that was really good. And they were not necessarily super worried about Oregon's passing attack. Now, they could have gotten burnt a couple times, but their pressure got home. And on the play in the second quarter where they settled for a field goal, Dante Moore had his running back wide open on the rail route, but because the pressure was there, he wasn't able to see it. So they settled for a field goal to tie the game. There was a missed pass interference on Oregon on the ensuing drive that Cignetti gets warned for, and felt like he was literally playing the game. He was literally almost halfway on the field and got a warning for it. Now, in his defense, there should have been a pass interference called, but they don't get that. And that was the third call that the refs had missed that should have gone in Indiana's favor that seemed to a lot of people very obvious. And Cignetti was just letting him know, you guys are missing calls here, and that's going to cost them the game. But ultimately, again, it doesn't. But at the time, it felt like all the momentum was with Oregon and all the calls were going their way. Now, I do have to say that this was a fun coordinator matchup. I did like that. Even though Indiana was getting pressure on Dante Moore, Will Stein had good counters by going to empty sets with his offense. It gave Dante Moore opportunities to see where the pressure was coming from. It also put his guys in one-on-one matchups. So I think that you have to give him credit for figuring out, hey, this isn't working. How do we fix that? How do we adjust to that? Because Indiana was getting pressure, and you have to give the Hoosiers credit. I was really impressed by that defense. I think they're going to be a problem for a lot of teams, and it's going to be fun to see how they're able to compete against the best of the best. And Oregon was having trouble at times as well. Now, they go down and they miss a 36-yard field goal. So that was a missed opportunity. You felt like Oregon had a chance to potentially take the lead there, and they miss. And what makes it worse is that Indiana then goes down, they take that, and they move down the field and kick a 58-yard field goal with 3 seconds left to give them the lead heading into halftime. So there wasn't a ton of momentum to be given, but it felt like Indiana felt really good going into the half with that lead when they could honestly have been down 3 or tied. So Indiana's feeling really good going into that halftime, and coming out of the second half, it was more of the same. Oregon gets the game tied with another field goal Atticus Sappington hits that 33-yarder. Now, Dante Moore does get hit. He was limping a little bit. I don't think ultimately it made a huge difference, but something to keep an eye on for the next couple of days. But it feels like it was kind of a moot point at that point. And then again, Indiana giving the ball to their best playmakers. Roman Hemby was a clear, great addition today. We saw that why they brought him in via the transfer portal, and his explosive plays on the drive in the third quarter where they scored a touchdown was very clear that they knew exactly what they were getting, and it's clear that he has an extra gear that maybe they didn't have last year. Then you head in the fourth quarter, and Oregon feels like they get a ton of momentum with an interception return for a touchdown. Now, when you look at what Oregon was doing and what they've done this year, freshmen have played a big role in that. And that has been something we've seen on the offensive side of the ball. But Brandon Finney was tested quite a bit today, and he did a good job of hanging in there against two really good wide receivers in Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt. And he gets a pick six to start the fourth quarter. And you felt like, holy crap, this is going to be the turning point for Oregon. This is where, we've seen Indiana in the past where they played tough teams, and there's one point it felt like the game slips away from them. And that felt like maybe that was going to be the case, but it wasn't. Indiana still held true to who they were. They kept doing exactly what they needed to do, and they ultimately take away this game for them. So the game's tied 20-20, and Elijah Surratt scores an 8-yard touchdown with 6:23 left. He had a couple of big receptions on that drive, and then later in the fourth quarter, a field goal puts them up 30-20, and then, it's an interception gives them that, and then another interception ultimately seals the game. So a great win for Indiana. Fernando Mendoza, we didn't really talk a ton about him. He was fairly solid, 20 of 31 for 215 yards and 1 touchdown. I did like how this Indiana team used his legs. They didn't feature it a ton, but in key moments, they knew that Oregon was keen on their running backs, and it was going to give Fernando Mendoza opportunities to pick up yards. Now, it did not look good early, but he found ways to be selective of when he used it, and it ultimately gave them an advantage that Oregon didn't have an answer for. Again, didn't use him a ton, but when he did use it, he was very effective with what he did. Another big one in the afternoon slate is Oklahoma and Texas, the Red River Shootout, Red River rivalry, whatever you want to call it. John Mateer with the surprise of the day, playing in this game. I don't think a lot of people expected him to actually play. I know they were talking about prepping him for that start, but he was the biggest surprise. Honestly, I was kind of shocked that he played this game, and it gave the game a little bit extra energy. It gave it another storyline to pay attention to. And Oklahoma actually gets off to a decent start. They start with a 3-0 lead, and the story of that was that John Mateer was leading them down the field, and it wasn't Michael Hawkins. John Mateer was on the field. He was starting, and it felt like up until kickoff, you still weren't sure what he was going to do. And it added to the game and added to the theatrics, and this was an intense game. The defenses were playing with a ton of energy, and it was really fun to watch both defenses play. Now, Texas didn't really look afraid of John Mateer. They basically were saying, you're going to prove that you're 100%. You're going to prove that you are a threat, and they were not afraid. They were playing really aggressive. They were sending pressure, and they were basically daring John Mateer to beat them. And I thought that was a very aggressive but very smart strategy for Texas, because they needed to play with confidence. And speaking of confidence, I thought Arch Manning looked better. I'm not going to say he looked good. Some people are saying that he looked actually good in this game, but I think that he looked better. We had multiple moments where you saw him making good decisions. He played kind of loose and just laid back and made smart decisions. He was decisive, but there were plenty of times still where he's indecisive, where you can see that he wants to do something and then second guesses it. There were a number of times where he had running room, but he just keeps thinking, oh, I have to throw this. And there are still some things that are frustrating, but I think one thing you can take from this is that something clicked in his brain where he realized, I don't always have to overthink everything. I can just play loose. I can play free. And we saw that today. That was one thing that was really nice. Now, Manning finished 21 of 27 for 166 yards and 1 touchdown. That was a solid performance in a rivalry game, and it ultimately helped Texas more than I think people realized. However, they don't get any points on the board, and Texas actually adds another field goal to go up 6-0, where they're getting chunk plays, but the drive kind of stalls. And with 9 minutes left in the second quarter, Oklahoma's up 6-0. Texas does respond. They did have chances, again, moments where Arch Manning kind of missed on some plays. They do get on the board, though, 6-3, and that's it's their second field goal attempt. The first one they had went right off the upright, so you felt like, okay, this is going to be maybe one of those games, but they stayed calm. They made smart decisions, and they're ultimately down 6-3. And Oklahoma gets the ball late in the first half, and they're driving, and they have an opportunity. And this is where we see the decision-making of John Mateer come into play. Now, we've talked about this a little bit coming into the year. We knew that John Mateer had the potential to do great things, but with that, there are also some decisions that were questionable. Some of the things that he's done this year, same thing at Washington State, where you're going to just have to live with. And today it really came back to bite them. Now, you can make an argument that he's still recovering from the hand surgery. Again, I can give you that, but still, some of these decisions that he was making, specifically the one with 2 seconds left, you had the ball, you didn't have to throw the ball to the end zone. He makes a poor decision, and it gets picked off by Texas, limiting an opportunity to add another 3 on the board. Now, hindsight's 2020. When you look back at it, it doesn't make a difference in the score, but it might have made a difference in the momentum and how you felt about that game. So you go into halftime up 6-3, but it feels like Texas has a little bit of momentum. The third quarter and really the second half was all Texas. Texas just took care of things from there. They had a good drive in the beginning of the third quarter. DeAndre Moore gets wide open somehow in the back of the end zone. Nobody's covering him, and Manning finds him. And honestly, when you watch the play, I'll have to go back and watch again just to make sure I did see that right. But it looks like he even hesitates when he sees DeAndre Moore because he's not fully confident in what he's doing. But DeAndre Moore had nobody around him, and Arch ultimately does pull the trigger and throws the ball downfield. You're just, again, frustrated, but maybe you're seeing the wheels spin a little bit more. You're seeing the decision making, and the busted coverage leads to a touchdown. A huge momentum boost to Texas. Later in the third quarter, as time is winding down, you add a field goal to that as well, and Quadrevian Wisner had a big catch for them, and he was the biggest bright spot, I think, for either team offensively. He had some big plays. He had a 37-yard run. He had a 51-yard reception. He was a big reason why it was a 19-yard reception at 51 yards after catch. Again, just such a good bright spot, and it was fun to see him because we saw him last year and we just haven't seen him play to that level yet, and it was fun to see him actually play like that once again and give this team a lot of exciting opportunities in this game. Fourth quarter, Shipley misses another field goal. This one was 56 yards. It ultimately goes up short, but not really one that I was really worried about. I think I have more concerns about the one he hits off the upright more so than kicking it short. You just know that he can't make it from 56 maybe. The exciting play, though, happens on a punt return. You have a really good game going for you, but you maybe don't feel like, okay, we're up 13-6. The game really isn't sealed by any means. And then you get a 75-yard punt return on the sideline. It was thrilling. Some broken tackles, bounces off a teammate, and it gets into the end zone. That felt like that was kind of the end of it. You do see a field goal added by Texas at the end, but 23-6, Texas, you have to feel good about this one. Oklahoma, things to work on. Part of it is just John Mateer's decision-making wasn't great. 20 of 38 for 202 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. The rushing attack averaged 1.6 yards per carry. Not really going to do a ton, but the defenses really get the most love here. They have to get most of the credit because Texas defense only gives up 6 points. And really, with 9 minutes left in the second quarter, that was the last time Oklahoma scored any points. But for Oklahoma, you also have to feel confident about what you were able to do. You gave up 16 points. You didn't, the punt return is the only touchdown or the second touchdown that you gave up. And really, it was just that busted coverage that was maybe the alarming thing. But this defense did a lot of good things. They should feel pretty good about what they did, and that's not really surprising. This has been a good defense so far for Oklahoma this year. For Texas, same thing. Your defense played with a ton of energy. They were thumping. They were hitting really hard, and it was a big reason why they won this game. Both teams are very optimistic going forward, and if Arch can continue making those strides and continue making those smart decisions, Texas is going to be in good hands. For Oklahoma, you got to find a way to kind of dial John Mateer back in. You got to find ways. I mean, it was his first game back from surgery that nobody expected him to play, so I will give him that. However, there are some things that still need to be fixed, and I know that Ben Arbuckle is going to talk to him about it, and they're going to try to dial that in, because if Oklahoma plays this way again, they're going to get beat by a lot more teams. But if they are able to get John Mateer back in rhythm, get him back in rhythm with his teammates, this offense will be just fine. TCU at Kansas State, this was honestly one that I thought was going to be a lower scoring game. The first quarter was kind of a snooze fest, if you will. The Kansas State had 73 total yards, TCU 65 total yards, no points. Both defenses were playing really well early on. They were making things very difficult, and I think that you saw some things from both teams that were concerning but also exciting. Now, TCU's rushing attack kind of had a little bit of a revival, if you will. Kavorian Barnes is back in the lineup, 12 carries for 81 yards, averaged 6.8 yards per carry. Other than him, though, not exactly great. Avery Johnson looked good at times, very hit or miss, especially early on. There were times where he was making really good throws, and there were times where he was missing pretty poorly. Now, he does finish 16 of 26 for 198 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. So he did not turn the ball over through the air, but you did not see a ton of consistency from him where you think that he's still taking a step. Now, TCU does get this scoring started late in the first or second quarter when you see them run the ball in from 1 yard out. Ed Small was kind of a nice revelation for this offense. Yet another wide receiver to worry about if you're an opposing defense. Kansas State, though, responds with 2 touchdowns of their own. Avery Johnson to Garrett Oakley for 32 yards. Again, this is where we saw the good of Avery Johnson. We saw him make some accurate throws, some nice throws. And then the second touchdown is actually a fumble return where Josh Hoover's throwing a pass and it barely goes backwards, and Kansas State recovers it, brings it back for a touchdown. Now, for TCU, the offense looked sloppy today. I thought that they did not look very good consistently. They had times where they looked explosive. They had times when they moved the ball efficiently, but that was one of those where it's just, you look sloppy. It's not exactly great. And Kansas State's defense punished them. They took advantage. They capitalized on those mistakes. And the turnovers, to me, really were the difference in the game. The turnovers that were returned for touchdowns, because the first half, it's 14-7. And Kansas State is up. The second half is another turnover. Hoover's throwing a pass, and it's obviously picked off and returned for a touchdown. It was not the last interception he'd throw on the day, but this one is picked off, and Desmond Purnell takes it back for a touchdown, and it's 21-7. And K-State just has Josh Hoover's number right off the bat. They also had another touchdown later in the third quarter, another good throw by Avery Johnson to Garrett Oakley for a 17-yard touchdown. TCU didn't go anywhere, though. Josh Hoover throws a touchdown pass. Ed Small factors into that with a 41-yard catch to lead that drive. And with 2:09 left, they're still in this game. But once again, Kansas State finds a way to answer. Avery Johnson finds Jerron Bradley from 12 yards out Johnson's just in a zone, and this is a stretch where he's looked really good. Now, TCU, again, is just going to keep responding. And Eric McAllister, honestly, I don't think Eric McAllister knows how to catch a pass for less than 20 yards. I just don't think that he's capable of doing that, because all he does is score explosive plays. An 85-yard touchdown on the very next play. Josh Hoover finds him, catches it, breaks the tackle, scores an 85-yard touchdown. From there, Kansas State adds 2 field goals in the fourth quarter. They get that interception that we talked about where it goes off Kaforian Barnes' hands. K-State picks it off. And then a turnover on downs gives Kansas State another field goal. And then TCU does add a touchdown later. Eric McAllister, again, can't be under 20, 37-yard touchdown with 31 seconds left. It's too little too late. It was 41-28 at that point. And TCU ultimately does not have enough to hang in this game. Again, those mistakes were the difference. That little stretch there in the section that people always want to talk about in the end of the first half, beginning of the second half, 14 points there were ultimately the points that gave Kansas State the cushion that they needed. Only 2 other games that we'll point out in the afternoon slate. NC State did give Notre Dame a little bit of a scare early, but Notre Dame does pull away, wins 36-7. CJ Carr 19-31 for 342 yards and 2 touchdowns, puts them to 4-2. NC State falls to 4-3. Colorado rallying around Deion Sanders and what he's going through stuns Iowa State, gives Iowa State their second consecutive loss. The Cyclones fall to 5-2. Colorado with a 24-17 win moves up to 3-4. Abu Sama, though, for Iowa State, 24 carries for 177 yards and 2 touchdowns. It was just kind of a sloppy game. The defense had some issues, but Colorado, got to tip your cap to them. Very good win for them. They played with a lot of energy, played with a lot of passion, and they come away with the upset win. And it was really fun to see the fans rush the field. A good win for Coach Prime's team. One other afternoon game that we'll dive into is kind of the afternoon and then late night here. 3 games that we have. We'll start with Nebraska at Maryland. This was going to be a potential shootout, and it was a back and forth game that I left very impressed from both quarterbacks. Now, Nebraska does get off to a strong start. You saw Nazia Hunter with a 64-yard touchdown pass from Dylan Raiola. Explosive play. That's why you brought him in via the transfer portal. Hunter finished with 5 catches for 125 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Nebraska's skill position players were making a ton of great plays. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But Maryland's defense did not look good. The tackling wasn't great, and it was a reason why Nebraska was able to move the ball so effectively. They jump out to a 10-0 lead in the second quarter, and it felt like Nebraska was just gonna kind of run this game. But as Maryland has done, they rely on Malik Washington, and they basically just keep bouncing back. And you saw Nolan Ray run for 28 yards to put them on the board. It was a nice little, he saw that there was an opening on the right side, broke a couple tackles, took off from there. Malika Washington then adds a nice pass up the seam to put them up 14-10. So this was a fun game from the get-go. And the second quarter was the most exciting part. So Maryland has all the momentum. They're feeling really good, and Nebraska just bounces back like they did. And Dylan Raiola looked really good in the first half. Finds Lindenmeyer for 7 yards. You had the 85-yard kick return after the Maryland touchdown that put them in position. And then just a few minutes later, a couple of minutes later, actually, Hunter gets his second touchdown from Raiola. Great ball placement. Just looked like he was very dialed in. And that wasn't ultimately going to be the case later, but Nebraska's looking really good. Maryland does add a field goal to get them down the field. Malik Washington, again, just looks so poised. You have to give him so much credit for what he's able to do. And this was a really fun team to watch today. I think that they played with a great amount of poise, a great amount of confidence, and they're just a young team that's got some things to figure out. Going into halftime, it's 24-17 Nebraska, and you felt like maybe Nebraska had the momentum to kind of pull away, but it was actually Washington that dominated the third quarter. Malik Washington, once again, is throwing darts down the field, and he runs for a good gain and he does fumble it, but it gets reviewed, ultimately determines that his knee was down. It was honestly one of those bang, bang plays, and we had a couple of those today that went the way of various different teams, but this one goes in the way of Maryland, and then later they had a 1-yard touchdown run. Few minutes later, they get the ball back, and it's because they get a pick six. And it's a ball that Dylan Raiola should have thrown inside. He throws it to the outside. His wide receiver goes inside. Joyner picks it off and gives them a touchdown. And this is a game where it's 31-24. Maryland, they have all the momentum. This is a team that just came off of a tough loss against Washington where they gave up a 20-point lead, and you're feeling like, okay, they're not going to do that in this one. They're playing a good team, they're playing them close, and they have the lead. The fourth quarter, though, it was basically just Nebraska taking care of business and shutting things down. Emmett Johnson had a big 50-yard run that set up a field goal. It was a really nice run for him, and he had a big day. 21 carries for 176 yards, 0 touchdowns, but average 8.4 yards per carry. And then later in the fourth quarter, with 1 minute and 11 seconds left, Dylan Raiola throws the ball to Dane Key, who makes an insane one-handed catch to give them the lead. And it was Raiola's 4th touchdown of the game. Raiola finished 20 of 29 for 260 yards with 4 touchdowns, 3 picks, though. The 3 picks, very disappointing. Dane Key, 4 catches, 43 yards, and 1 touchdown. I actually thought that Malik Washington played pretty well, was the more consistent quarterback. Raiola had the better moments, but Malik Washington looked like the more consistent quarterback. Finished 27 of 37 for 249 yards and 1 touchdown. So if you're Maryland, another disappointing loss, another loss where you give up a late comeback. And if you're Nebraska, there are some things you got to get sorted out. 3 picks from Dylan Raiola is not going to be acceptable. You got to find a way to fix those mistakes, because that can't keep happening if you want to make a run in the Big Ten, if you want to make it to the college football playoff. The talent is obviously there, and maybe they just needed to struggle through some things, but that is something you're definitely going to have to fix. But they found a way to win. This was a really fun game if you were able to watch it. Nebraska comes away with that 34-31 win. Another game that actually finished 34-31, Tennessee and Arkansas. This was a fun game, and one that I don't think we expected to be as fun as it actually was. Now, Arkansas does add some later scores to make it closer, but this was still a back and forth game for the most part. Arkansas gets things started when Taylor Green has an 11-yard run. The rushing attack for Arkansas was really good today. Green had 17 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. Braylon Russell, 8 carries for 47 yards. Mike Washington was the leading rusher, 19 carries for 131 yards and 1 touchdown. Green gets things started off, and then Tennessee gets the ball back and has no issues moving the ball down the field. They had good balance, throwing the football, running the football, and Deshaun Bishop gets his 1 touchdown on the board early to tie the game up. Arkansas has some big plays and then a turnover, and Tennessee doesn't do anything with it. And Tennessee, I think, was able to do pretty much whatever they wanted at times against this Arkansas defense, but also they just couldn't finish drives at times. And it was actually Arkansas that had a 10-7 lead after the first quarter. Now, Tennessee would bounce back and tie things up heading into half. They had a field goal where Aguilar just misses on a touchdown pass. Arkansas adds the touchdown for Mike Washington, and then a touchdown from Aguilar to Miles Kitselman, where Braylon Staley had a beautiful explosive play for that Tennessee offense that puts things tied going into the half. From there, and starting out the second half, Tennessee, this is really where they won the game. They were able to score 10 points in the third quarter. They get a field goal from 50 yards. Again, Deshaun Bishop was making big runs. Joey Aguilar was adding to that as well. Second score of that quarter, Peyton Lewis scores from 2 yards out. It was set up by a Deshaun Bishop run, but he goes down with an injury. We'll keep an eye on that one. And then in the fourth quarter, they had yet another Peyton Lewis touchdown off of a Taylor Green fumble. And again, that was kind of too much for Arkansas to overcome. Now, a nice pass from Taylor Green to Rohan Jones gives them a touchdown. They do add yet another touchdown later with 2:55 left, but they don't get any more points. And Tennessee essentially hangs on. It wasn't a pretty win by any means, but they were able to hang on against an Arkansas team that has a good offense. We talked about how Arkansas could potentially pull off the upset. It's just that their defense wasn't able to do what it needed to do to participate in that either. Florida at Texas A&M. Florida got things off to a good start and showed that they were going to take things from last week and carry it into this week as well. And I thought that this was a solid performance from both sides. It was a game in which you saw some pretty good offense in the first half, and then it was kind of the Texas A&M show from that point forward. Florida gets things started with a nice touchdown from Legway to Jackson, 1 yard out. And then the freshmen, once again for this team, Vernell Brown and Dallas Wilson made some big catches to get them up 7-0. But Texas A&M bounces back with 2 scores. Mario Craver, a 67-yard pass from Marcel Reed, and then Reed punches it in for an 8-yard touchdown. Later, you see Reed connect with Morrow for 22 yards. Again, Morrow was solid on that drive. The offensive line was playing really well, and they're up 14-7. But Florida didn't go anywhere. They found a way to bounce back again, and Dallas Wilson scores a touchdown from DJ Legway. Legway was throwing some really nice passes. Jaden Baugh had an absolutely nasty stiff arm that I'm going to have to go find on the All-22. That was a really good play. You can see the confidence coming from him and the way he's running the football because this offense actually has some life. Second quarter was a little bit more dull. Levan Moss had a nice 22-yard touchdown run, had a nice stiff arm of his own, and Marcel Reed's legs were a proven problem for this Florida defense. Now, he only ran 7 times for 37 yards, but it was clear that his mobility was causing problems for this Florida defense. The second half was pretty much all Texas A&M. Florida does kick a field goal with 7:08 in the third quarter. Trey Wilson had a big catch, but they get a field goal out of that. Texas A&M just basically took care of business. They have a field goal in the third quarter as well. And then in the fourth quarter, they have a touchdown from Ruben Owens on a turnover on downs. And then they had a field goal late in the fourth quarter to give them an extended lead. So a 34-17 win. Marcel Reed, 16 of 26 for 234 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. We talked about his rushing output as well. DJ Legway, 21 of 37, 245 yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, I think that this is a Florida team that if they're able to keep things together, and if Billy Napier is going to stick around, I think that they do have a young core that could be really exciting next year. If you break that up, I don't know if everybody's going to stay together. So that's one thing to keep in mind. There's clearly some potential here. There's clearly something you can build on. For Texas A&M, this is a playoff team. This looks like a playoff team. That looks like they are taking care of business. The offensive line plays really well. The defense is stifling. And I think that you have to feel really good about this Aggies team with what they could do going forward. A really good performance from them. They were able to endure that surge by Florida, and they were able to shut down the Gators offense in the second half. So a good win for Texas A&M, and they have a lot to look forward to in the rest of the year. Other games that were kind of in this slot as well. Navy finds a way to survive against Temple. Temple's been a tough team for a lot of teams this year. Navy comes away with a 32-31 win, a late minute touchdown by Blake Horvath, a passing touchdown by that, was able to seal the win there. Horvath ran 19 times for 155 yards and 2 touchdowns. Maybe the surprise of the group of 5, Marshall absolutely thumps Old Dominion 48-24, drops Old Dominion to 4-2. Marshall's all the way up to 3-3. Colton Joseph, a decent game, 15-28 for 266 yards and 1 touchdown, but the Monarchs get absolutely dominated in week 7. Kansas at Texas Tech. This is not one we have to take it too much into, but there's some things to talk about. Texas Tech looked like they were going to win by 100. It started off with an absolutely just dominant performance. Now, the one thing I'll say is that the uniform matchup in this one was great. Kansas had, an all white look, and then they had just the Kansas Jayhawk head on the blue helmets. The blue is nice and clean. Texas Tech had that new logo that we've talked about before with their black uniforms, kind of the alternate uniforms, a great uniform matchup. And from there, it was the Texas Tech show. Cameron Dickey gets things started with a 71-yard touchdown run where nobody really touches them. They forced a punt on Kansas' first drive, and they take one play. He finds a gap, and he just hits it. And then from there, Kansas fumbles on the next play. Terrence Carter catches a 21-yard pass from Baron Morton, and all of a sudden they're up 14-0. They had a field goal later in the first quarter, and it's 17-0. Jacoby Williams and Cameron Dickey were taking turns, essentially, making big plays, and it was Cameron Dickey's time to shine, but Jacoby Williams had some really nice plays early on. They had another touchdown, and actually I forgot, they went for 2 on that second touchdown. So they were up 15-0, and they get up 21-0 in the second quarter. Baron Morton looks dialed in, but then he has a play where he gets sacked. His ankle gets rolled on, and I don't know what happened, but he is out, and you're kind of getting flashbacks to the Utah game. And from there, Kansas takes advantage. They score 17 unanswered points in the second quarter, and it's looking like this is going to be problematic. This is a closer game than Texas Tech wants, and Will Hammond does go in once again for Texas Tech, but just like the Utah game, he does not look comfortable early on. He does not look like he is comfortable with what he's doing, and Mac Leftwich does not have an answer right off the bat. Again, Kansas scores a touchdown. Williams gets a 10-yard touchdown from Jalen Daniels. Jalen Daniels was a big reason why they were in this game. His ability to move the ball with his legs, with his arm, his ability to escape pressure, those were really good things for Kansas, but it was not a sustainable thing. Texas Tech's defense, once again, shows exactly why it's one of the best in the country. It felt like David Bailey and Romello Height were just sitting in Jalen Daniels' lap every single play. The only reason why he didn't get sacked more is because he is mobile. That being said, it was 21-17 heading into halftime. So you're feeling pretty good if you're Kansas. You just got absolutely destroyed in the first quarter, and you're only down 4 going into the half. From there, though, Texas Tech kind of just shuts things down, and the offense figures it out, finds its footing. Will Hammond looks a little bit more confident. He has a 20-yard touchdown run, and it looks like he's getting in rhythm, and you're feeling pretty good going into the fourth quarter. Cameron Dickey adds yet another big run, a 55-yard touchdown run. Will Hammond's legs once again are a factor, and then Will Hammond absolutely thumps a Kansas defender on his way to a 10-yard touchdown run to put them up 42-17. So it was all Texas Tech in the second half. A really good performance from this team. 505 yards of total offense, 7.4 yards per play. You just have concerns about this team at quarterback. If Baron Morton's going to be the quarterback, I don't know what you have to do to keep him healthy, but he continues to be injured. He continues to have his struggles staying on the field, and that's concerning. For Will Hammond, you got to find ways to get him in rhythm early. Yes, you were able to win this game, but there are better teams in college football than Kansas that if you don't get him in rhythm early, you're going to be in trouble and you're going to be in for a long day. But still, a good win. The defense was absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, Height and Bailey combined for 5 tackles for loss and 5 sacks, and it was a big reason why Kansas couldn't do anything in the second half. Georgia at Auburn. Georgia comes away with a 20-10 win, and honestly, this was a kind of a controversial first half. Now, Auburn has their alternate face mask, the orange face mask. I kind of like that they've switched those things up. Again, uniforms are something that's just fun to me, but we're not going to take too much time on that. Auburn does get off to a good start. They're up 10-0 early in the first half, and it looks like Jackson Arnold's playing with confidence. They are getting the passing attack going as much as they could, which didn't obviously sustain itself, but the offense looked like it was doing some good things against that Georgia defense. So a 10-0 lead. Auburn's defense is being extremely disruptive. It almost looked like they didn't really care what Gunnar Stockton was going to be able to do. They were going to force him to beat them. And I think the point in which things changed was you had a 1st and goal, and Jackson Arnold rushes on a QB sneak and it gets knocked out. And honestly, if you look at the review, I don't know if you can definitively say what actually happened, if it was the fumble, what happened before he got in there, if it was after, but it was so close. He ultimately is determined that he fumbles. Georgia takes it from there, and that's where the momentum to me kind of swung in Auburn's favor. Now, the one thing I'll say is that, Georgia gets the field goal to be down 10-3 going in halftime. Auburn is just dominating this game in a way. The total yards were 237-78. Auburn was just keeping Georgia's offense in check, and there really wasn't much they could do. Now, one thing Auburn fans are going to definitely talk about is the penalties. There were some questionable penalties in this game, and it kept Georgia in it. Is a big reason why they were still competing in this game. And then you kind of take that momentum from the fumble, and from there it was kind of just more of the same. And Georgia wins the second half. They score 17 points in the second half. We don't have to dive too much into it. This was overall, it was an ugly game. It was a defensive struggle or battle, and then it was an offensive struggle in the second half. So it was, again, Georgia finds a way to win. They find a way to survive. Not the greatest game for either side, but there's definitely something that's going to be talked about. There are plenty of things to discuss. I don't need to dive into them. I'm sure Auburn fans and Georgia fans all have their opinions on this game, but a 20-10 win for the Georgia Bulldogs. I thought that the defense did what it needed to do, and that stop, again, in that second quarter, that stop, the fumble recovery, was a big reason why the momentum shifted, and maybe that was enough for them to get the win they needed. Michigan at USC. This was a game that could have been a lot closer, but we saw a different version of USC that we did not see in the loss they just sustained to Illinois. Now, this was a back and forth game early. I thought that USC and Michigan's defenses were playing with a ton of intensity, and it was physical. And USC gets things off to a good start. Jacoby Lane gets a 2-yard touchdown pass from Jane Maeva with 8:57 left. The ball was just moving down the field so easily for USC early. Now, again, this was a physical game. Waymon Jordan had a really good physical run. Michigan forced a fumble with a nasty hit that got them the ball back. Both defenses were playing with a tenacity that was really fun to watch. First quarter ends with USC up 7-0. Michigan then responds with their own touchdown drive. Donovan McCulley gets an 8-yard touchdown pass from Bryce Underwood. The one thing to note, though, is Justice Haynes heads to the locker room in the second quarter, and we saw him on the sideline kind of getting worked on. That is something to monitor going forward, because he has been a big reason why they've been able to move the football and why they've had success. Him not being in the lineup definitely hurt this offense. And once again, Bryce Underwood was trying to just hang in there, and he just did what he could, and it wasn't pretty at times, but he's also showing his toughness. And if they can just hang on to him long enough and show them that, hey, the things are going to get better, then this kid is going to be special. 15-24 for 207 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Not his greatest performance, but again, a lot of the things he did spoke to his teammates and showed that this is going to be a fun kid to watch. So it's tied at 7, and from there it was basically just USC. Mekhi Lemon had a 12-yard touchdown pass from Jane Maeva, where he's basically falling backwards, has the defender all over him, and somehow manages to secure the catch. Now, Waymon Jordan, I don't know what happened to him. I saw him on the sideline with his cleat off. Something happened there, and insert King Miller, and it looks like USC is going to be just fine without Waymon Jordan. King Miller had a massive game. 18 carries for 158 yards, 8.8 yards per carry, and 1 touchdown. He has a 15-yard touchdown run after a 49-yard run to give USC a 21-7 lead in the second half. USC also could have extended their lead. Jane Maeva made a really terrible decision to throw across his body as he's going out of bounds, and Michigan picks it off. But then Michigan is driving later, and Bryce overthrows it for a USC interception. Fourth quarter, it's basically just USC finishing it out. They get a field goal from 54 yards out. Michigan does get a 69 touchdown for Andrew Marsh from Bryce Underwood. They go for 2, but it's too little too late. You have another touchdown from USC to seal it, to make it a 31-13 win for the Trojans. Overall, I thought that quarterbacks looked all right, definitely had their struggles. This is where USC's firepower on offense was just too much. And if you're Michigan, there's only so much you can do. The defense can't score as much as they want, and Michigan's going to have those issues for the rest of the year unless they get something figured out for Bryce Underwood. Other games of note in that late period: Iowa absolutely destroys Wisconsin on the road, 37-0. Kamari Moulton, 15 carries for 96 yards and 1 touchdown, puts Iowa up to 4-2. LSU at home wins 20-10 to go up to 5-1, and not the prettiest win. It was a very ugly win, very ugly game for both sides. South Carolina falls to 3-3. Garrett Nussmeier, 20 of 33 for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns for LSU. Again, not a pretty game, but LSU does come away with the win.